Hello and welcome to this week's episode of #Leadership What's on Your Mind. Remember, we're a podcast to help you stop and think about your leadership journey, and we're going to add value by speaking to amazing people with amazing stories and experts in their field. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel if you're watching us, and if you're listening to us on your podcast provider, make sure you hit a follow. So today we are speaking to Darren. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good, and I'm really pleased that we've got you on. Me and Darren bumped into each other at the start of this year and worked alongside each other for quite a few months or quite a few days this year and talk about like-minded people coming together. And after the second day, and we realized that we've got exactly the same backgrounds, which was quite funny at the time. And we've always met up for the odd drink every now and again to share our sort of journeys, life and business as well. So it's really a pleasure to have you on. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on. I know you're going to add lots of value. So without saying anything else, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself. So as I hit the 20-minute timer, for those who don't know who you are, tell us about who you are and what you do.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. So great to be invited on this. Was this 102, 103?
Yeah, 103, I think.
Fantastic. Yeah. So my name's Darren Broad. I always introduce myself as ex-military, although I only did 9 years in the Royal Air Force, and I ended up as a physical training instructor, much the same as Stuart did. I left there. When I left there, it was obvious to me that I was involved and passionate about performance. So I went into health and fitness and personal training like quite a lot of ex-military people do, as you'd know, Stuart. And I loved that. I really loved working with people and seeing them grow and develop. But there was something missing, and I didn't realize what that was until I bumped into a friend of mine who was doing performance psychology and applying it in businesses. And I suddenly went, wow, I haven't joined the dots as well as I should have done. And the bit that I've always worked on with, as a PTI and as a personal trainer was me pushing people to do well. And sometimes their biggest barrier was them. And when I went and saw this performance psychology, I realized that I'd been approaching it all wrong. And if I worked on their head instead of just their bodies, I'd have probably got different results. So since then, that was in probably 1997, 98. I've been doing this. I set my own business up in 2001 called Potential Plus. I've got a business partner, Mark, who joined me about 10, 11 years ago. And we've been running our consultancy since 2001.
Yeah, excellent. In my intro, I was going to tip my hat to the gap between your PTI course and my PTI course, but I thought I'd leave it and not embarrass you there.
Yeah. Mine was 30, I think.
Oh, mine was 72, so there's a few years there. But it's good to see the different perspective from that gap as well. That's why I was quite interested to see because you've done a lot of time in this world, a lot more than I have as well, with regards to the corporate side of it as well. So Darren, we obviously are called #Leadership What's on Your Mind. And what comes to your mind when you hear the word leadership?
Well, sometimes it invokes that response where it's goosebumps on my arms, and then other times it's trepidation in my heart, I'd imagine. So those two extremes, I've experienced both, and I've probably learned more in hindsight from the bad leaders, and a lot of people on your podcast have probably said that as well. And the bad leaders in terms of how they treated you, their behavior around who they were. And then the good ones is like, you don't realize they're good until actually they've gone. And I don't think you thank them whilst they're a great leader. You're just experiencing great leadership. And then, when somebody else comes in after they've left, you probably go, wow, they were really good. I'm missing them. So that's my experience with the leadership. And, that jumps into my mind is my learning from both of those experiences.
Yeah, I love that, because how you said that first little bit evokes feelings and emotion. And you're right, like the impact both ends of those spectrums can have on you, not just on your journey, it's the feeling, isn't it, about what that brings to you, fear, but then that aspirational goosebumps, and that's a really good feeling. So I love that. So staying with you personally, Where do you think your leadership journey started? Is it on reflection? And now I'm asking you about it. Or was the light bulb moment at the time? Like, how far are we going back? Like, where's your fundamentals and foundations of leadership?
I would say on reflection, because, you know, when I left, I joined the military when I was 18 and I left when I was 27. And then from 27 onwards, I was basically my own boss. You know, I worked for a couple of companies for short periods of time. But then, you know, like I said, 2001, I set the business up. But I was freelancing before that. So on reflection, when I look back, it's specifically when somebody like yourself asks the question is, you know, about the leadership, is I have to really think. And then suddenly people jump into mind. Like I had a sergeant that worked with me as a PTI, and I didn't realize it, but he was probably more of a leader than our boss, you know, in the hierarchical stakes. So this, and the reason when I look back at it is he was a great leader because he always had our back. And I don't mean he let us get away with stuff. He did a little bit with certain things, but he always had our back. So if the boss was asking us to do stuff with no particular reason, he'd question it and he'd make sense of it. And I always realized that he was there for us. And sometimes he took some of the pain for us. And I like that. He was a strong leader. And like I say, he wasn't the top of the tree, but for me, he was a stronger leader than the physical education officer that was in charge.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask you a question. So about how you became a PTI and how did you come into the Air Force? And the reason I ask you that is because there is an element of looking for leadership qualities and skills as you're recruited. Don't know whether you remember that, what the recruitment process was back then, but there was an element of, like, certainly when I went through, about some of the things you had to show. Were you aware of that when you joined up?
No, I don't suppose so, because I was 18, like I said, and the reason why I joined is because, and you'll hear many people my age saying this, is I failed as a footballer. I didn't quite make it. You know, I was good enough, but I didn't put the effort in. And, you know, when I see some of your athletes on your podcasts, I'm in awe of them, because what they have is something that I didn't. And at 18, you know, I went for a trial at Wolverhampton Wanderers, and I came back from that. And my mum said to me, I remember it very well, she said to me, how did it go? And I said, well, nobody spoke to me. And she said, well, why don't you get a real job like your dad? And so I went, oh, okay. And I joined the Air Force because my dad was ex-military. And so I joined up, and I originally joined up as a mechanical transport driver. I don't know whether you knew that.
No, I didn't know that, no.
They weren't taking PTIs at the time. They were going to civilianize the trade. And so I joined up as a driver and spent my first few years driving everything there was in the military. But that's how I came to join the Air Force, is my mum's conversation. And that showed me that when I see your guys and the sporting experts that you have, they didn't give up. They actually went, no. They would have said to my mum, no, mum, you know, I'm going to go for this. This is where I'm headed. And I didn't. And so when I look back at it, that was my biggest failing as a sports person, is I didn't push hard enough.
Wow, that's amazing. And again, on reflection, but these that just reminds me when people say those sliding door moments and those decisions and those conversations you can have, like, mold what you're doing now, which is great and awesome. Okay, so we've started asking people about a person or an event that's had a pertinent impact on your leadership journey, whether it be positive or negative. You've mentioned obviously the sergeant in the military terms, but is there anything else that you would say had a profound impact on who you are now as a leader, a trainer, a deliverer, a business owner? What would you say?
Yeah, I know this sounds a bit corny and lots of people say it, but my dad, and when he passed, because he died 9-10 years ago, that I only realized, you know, in hindsight, how much of a leader he was. I saw that in the military, but he left the military after 35 years, moved up to Grimsby for some reason. and you know, when I went to see him, he was just Mr. Broad. He was dad to me, obviously, but Mr. Broad to everybody around him. And so there was no, he didn't have to act anything. Whereas if I think he'd have stayed around a military base around that, there'd have been a different side to my dad. But I just look back on it and reflect as his son. how much of a leader he was for me, you know, and how much now my wife says to me, "You're just like your dad," and I hope I am, and that, I think that's, in reflection, is one of those biggest moments for me, is like what he did without even announcing it, if you like, was phenomenal.
Yeah, and I love that. That's one of the reasons I had my dad on the podcast, episode 50, because there's a bit of a time capsule moment, isn't it? And it's amazing to think. And again, as a parent, we're parents, that the effect and the impact you can have on people. And again, that's a direct link to leadership, like the direct link that you have to the people around you and how you can affect them in a positive or negative way. Fantastic. So let's dig into a little bit about the work that you now do. We have chats all the time about the workshops we're delivering and the people and the teams we're helping and doing that facilitation and building that self and situational awareness. What's it like at the minute? What do you see across the board, like the here and now? I'm going to ask you a little bit about where it's come from, but what are the sort of things that you're dealing with right now off the back of the pandemic, back of working with teams that are wanting to level up?
Well, you know, the pandemic, this caused lots of confusion. So I've seen, we're working in organizations where, you know, the ground rules haven't been set firmly enough, and people are trying to find their way forwards with, you know, hybrid working, you know, fairness around that as well. So am I, you know, can I work from home? And can I do 3 days from home instead of coming to the office, where somebody else might have to go to the office all day because their role requires them to go to the office all day? And so there's that feeling, there's a little bit of conflict, that we're doing a lot of work around how do we work together as teams, and how do we support each other and accept there are going to be differences now in organizations. So, you know, that can affect performance. So if you look at a business, excuse me, and you're looking at profit and bottom line and all those things that you've got to keep an eye on, is any conflicts could potentially affect that. So you need to resolve them as quick as possible. And there's lots of organizations doing stuff around how do we work better as teams and team members.
Yeah, well, in yours, a lot of things that have been coming on my mind at the minute, and the conversations that we're doing with content and looking for the future, is about this: what does digital leadership look like in the future? Like, what, in your mind, what does the future look like for leadership and leaders? What do we need to be looking at? I've got my thoughts, but what do you think?
Well, I think once again, the last 2 years has forced us into this human element of leadership, where it can't be a transactional relationship between a leader and the team that you lead. It's got to be a human-based relationship. And there are so many people that I think struggle with that. And the digital side of things doesn't help it as much as it could do, I'd imagine. If you're always on the end of a screen, how do you really get to know somebody? You know, we got to know each other because we went out and had a couple of beers and had meals together, and we had great conversations. And there were a few of us doing that. And it felt like, when we were on that project, it felt different. And I hadn't felt that for a long time, because, you know, I've worked with my business partner, but we don't work together on different projects. I felt something different, and a connection with everybody there, especially, you know, we got on really well because of our background. So I think the future of leadership is really connecting with people and having that focus around people. And excuse me, the organization that we work for, historically, we're all around targets and profit. And the work we did was all about, how do you become about people, which will, by the way, get you your targets and profit. You can't take your eye off that. But it's human-based and it's relationship-based.
Yeah, totally right. And when you're saying about the what companies and businesses are looking at now, it needs that human element and that face-to-face element, but then you can then branch out into the digital world, and obviously we can have even better trust, quality conversations on the back of us meeting together and having these conversations now. It reminded me about, and my sort of point of view on this was, we've had some really good CEOs, business owners on the podcast, and I've really encouraged them to share that internally, because in my perspective, a lot of people who are going to show up and turn up in their business are the ones who are going to be sharing across all the multimedia of social media and platforms that we have now, to to turn up like a human being, like go and share their story and go and talk about their beliefs, values, their business strategy moving forwards. So then you've got your staff looking that you're actually standing up and representing the brand and the business, and you can like, oh, I can relate to that, and I can get that, and I see that. So awesome. So I've got a question. We were talking about psychometrics, and you've been involved in a couple of those. Obviously, I've delivered a few of these. What are your thoughts on how people are using them and really well, and what do you think are some of the downfalls?
Yeah, well, psychometrics, you either love them or you hate them. And when organizations really embrace it, you can have such positive impacts on terms of team performance and relationships within organizations. We're working with insights discovery at the moment. And so we've been using that for quite a while. Where it doesn't have the impact is where it's a one-off workshop and somebody will go, yeah, I want to do this. I want to know who I am. And they use it to label themselves. And as you know, the minute you turn around and say, well, this is who I am, deal with me, you're missing the point of a psychometric test, really. It's not about that. We're intelligent human beings. So I would say that if you ever get involved in psychometrics, is what is it that it's telling you is your strength or your preference, but what do you need to work on? And we can dial things. This is the language of insights, dialing up or dialing down some of our preferences. So if I'm talking with a team of people, especially as a leader, if I understand what your preference is for me to communicate better with you, then I can adapt my communication style. Stereotypically, if you look at a CEO, they're going to be fairly direct and blunt and to the point with their emails. If I'm a CEO and I've got somebody in my team that I know that needs a little bit of, hey, how you doing today, Stuart? What did you do at the weekend? And really listening, I can front that up on an email and change my impact immediately just by an extra 30 seconds and maybe a minute of putting some, maybe they call it fluff, I don't know, that's some of the terminology we use, but stuff that actually impacts people. And you said it earlier, emotionally. If you can connect with them emotionally, then psychometrics really work. And then obviously it's the follow-up. It's all right doing a workshop, but the follow-up and how do you really embrace it as a team is really important. So from our perspective, it's what's next after the workshop. How do we help you really engage with this? And we've worked with loads of different organizations where it's been ongoing for years, and that's because sometimes the teams turn over, so there's new personnel, or it's because we want to refresh this and make sure that we're using it in the right way, and we're not using it as an excuse sheet. We're using it to develop as human beings.
Yeah, we had a little chat before we jumped on, and I shared my frustration, and I always joke about this, the fact that when you do the psychometrics, it's basically a questionnaire, isn't it? There's lots of them out there, and it gives you some analytics about who you are, your preferences, strengths, weaknesses, etc. And it always makes me laugh when people are amazed that like, oh, this is exactly me. And it's like, well, you filled out the form and answered the questions. And again, like you said, the frustration is that some people then go, that's the way that's all I'm going to do. But there's another step, isn't there?
Sorry, you make me laugh there, Stu, because I had an experience in a room where we had a senior leadership team, and the top guy was in there and they're doing their reports. And the first part of insights is to look at the narrative and underscore some sentences that don't resonate with you, that, that's not me, that's definitely not me. And normally there's one or two, right? This guy, there's 20, there's a plus, and he's going, this is not like me at all. Look, and when we unraveled it a bit more, he'd got his PA to fill in his questionnaire.
I remember you telling me about that.
If that's feedback, I don't know what is.
Exactly, some direct feedback from people around you. I love that, a fishbowl effect. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to quickly get a couple of questions in. So where do you stand with, you mentioned about these psychometrics can give you your strengths and weaknesses. There's no right or wrong answer here, really, regards to what it is. It's more about the delivery and the implementation. But where do you stand on focusing on your strengths or focusing on your weaknesses as a leader?
Well, I think leaders nowadays are very, very aware. The ones I'm coming across, they are so in tune with who they are, what they bring to the party. And do you know what? If they can't dial up some stuff, they employ people who do it for them. You know, they have a filter that is around them. They have a great support mechanism around them, and great leaders. And like I say, the ones I'm dealing with at the moment are fantastic, and showing this forward thinking movement is, they're very aware, and they dial it up, they can adjust, they're adaptable. And I think if I was to say there's one big thing about leaders for me, it's this whole notion of they get trust. You look at them and you trust them. And now, you know, trust can morph into lots of different things. Trust that they do what they say they're going to do. Trust they have the credibility to be asking you to do what you need to do. But trust for me is the biggest word around leadership. If you can trust a leader, they're probably a great leader.
How do you build trust?
Yeah, good
It's a
point.
big question.
It's a very big question. Over time, it's something that you build over time, and as you know, you can lose it immediately. You may have had a friend in the past that you trusted for years, and then suddenly they do one thing, and that's it. You never speak to them again. If you're a leader in a business, you can't afford to have that impact on one person that you're leading, because then they're working against you, and that definitely impacts performance. So I think it's something that really takes a lot of work. And that bit about doing what you say you're going to do, I think is really important, and fairness drops out of that, and relationships drops out of that, everything.
Good, I love that. Consistency over time, I always go to. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Darren. That is 20 minutes. That's done.
Wow.
It goes really quickly. Thank you so much. We fitted so much in there. I'm really pleased how that went. So, ladies and gents listening, if you enjoyed that, make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. Make sure you follow us on your podcast provider. And as I say, I'm starting to get really good feedback off some of the episodes that we've had recently. Please let me know about your takeaways, and please pass it on to anybody who's going to find that useful and add value to their leadership journey. Every Wednesday at 6 a.m, another amazing guest will be coming your way. So Darren, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
No problem at all. I'll see you all next week, ladies and gents. Take care. Bye.